Hi everyone. The talk I'm going to give today is called "The Sky is the Limit: Counting Seals on the Farne Islands." And this has come about because we have been working with the National Trust to develop ways in which we can count the seals that breed on the Farne Islands, not just breed on the Farne Islands, but also use the Farne Islands throughout the year. Okay, so my talk will essentially sort of cover a little bit about the Farne Islands. I'm sure that everyone here knows where the Farne Islands are, what they consist of and everything like that sort of, but I thought I'd give a little bit of background to it sort of and keep you up to speed, as it were. And then I'm going to go into the sort of general biology of grey seals, only a little bit about that, so just give some general overview, and then sort of start talking about how we actually go about counting the seals, and in particular counting seal pups, and things like what, why do we do it, how has it been done in the past, and how are we going to progress this in the future. And then just finally, sort of as a little bit of to show sort of why perhaps we're doing this as well. Just give a very, very quick brief overview of how Storm Arwen has impacted the grey seals. Okay, so let's start off with the Farne Islands. Well, sort of, I'm here in Newcastle at the moment, and we go up the coast and we come to the Farne Islands up in the top here. I'll put my laser pointer on. Yes, so we have the Farne Islands up here, North Sunderland area, sort of just off Holy Island and Sea Houses. So that's the location, about sort of 45 miles north of Newcastle. And if we zoom into the islands themselves, then what we can see is that they're consisting of two main groups, okay? So an inner group and an outer group. Later on, sort of, this becomes a little bit sort of important, sort of, but at the moment, just sort of consider that we've got these two main groups of island. The inner group is about, I know, sort of about 2 miles offshore, and then the outer group is about the same sort of distance again out. So this is the inner group, and what we can see is the largest of all the Farne Islands, Inner Farne. That's this one here, but a couple of other important islands here are the Wide Opens and Knox's Reef, which is this area here. Okay, so that's the inner group. I want to mention the other islands. Before we just sort of look at the outer group here, and what we can see is the island on which the rangers stay when they're out on the outer group. This is Brownsman here, and that's closely associated with this other island called Staple Island. And in fact, the two islands, you can walk from one to the other at low water. Okay, sort of, so that they can be thought of as a single entity in some stages of the tide. And similarly, sort of what we have over here, the Wamses, the north and south Wamses. Again, you can walk from one to the other at low tide. Then we have Harker Rock, where the four fishers sort of went down. And they had the famous rescue by Grace Darling, and here we have Longston and the Northern Hares Rocks. Okay, sort of these are all important areas, as we'll see a bit later on. And the thing is that we know about the Farne Islands. Most people sort of go there sort of during the summer, and they go there to see the birds, because it is an incredible place to go and to see seabirds. David Attenborough himself has said that the Farne Islands is one of his favourite places, and certainly sort of we've had people come and visit who've said that it's a better experience than almost the Galapagos because you're so close to so many birds. But we're not going to talk about those today. We're going to talk about the other inhabitants. And that is the grey seal, Halichoerus grypus. And these are just some images of the seals sort of on the Farne Islands. Obviously, sort of along the lighthouse in the background there. This is sort of the fact that the seals don't just use the Farne Islands, but they also migrate over to other areas, and these are the seals sort of around Holy Island, where they come out and haul out on the sandbanks there. Okay, sort of, but this is what I'm going to be talking about, sort of mainly, sort of in the rest of this talk. And I think sort of some of these images actually sort of show you some of the problems that we have when it comes to grey seals, and that is that they tend to go and haul out sort of in inaccessible places, and when they do to get out there, sort of for example, if we look at this middle top image, if you're on a boat, you're at sort of eye level with the seals, and actually sort of it's very difficult to see sort of seals and count them if they're behind others. And it becomes very difficult to actually sort of count and monitor seals because of these factors. Okay, so but this is the seal that we're going to be talking about. There is another seal within the UK, which is the harbour or common seal, but we tend not to get those off our coast, certainly not in the same numbers that we get sort of when it comes to grey seals. And they have a slightly different biology. They're smaller than the grey seal, and they have a different sort of conservation status as well. If we have a look at sort of some of the general sort of biology of the grey seal as well, sort of when it comes to size, these are sexually dimorphic animals. The males are bigger than the females. So males tend to be over 2 meters in length, at least mature males anyway, whereas sort of females will be a little bit smaller. And that's in length, but that length also sort of equates to weight. So males can be anything sort of 200 to 250 kilos, whereas the females may be sort of much less than that, sort of about 150 kilos sorts of things, sort of weights. And when it comes to their lifespan, sort of females can live up to 35 years old. Very difficult to actually age seals. You can, if you find a dead seal, is to remove this teeth, and we can section the teeth and then count the rings, just as you would in a tree. But for a live seal, it's very difficult. You can, of course, sort of anesthetize them, extract the tooth, and age them that way. But that is very invasive, obviously, and very difficult to do. But yeah, so we can age them, and it seems that sort of males seldom live to beyond sort of 25 years old, so generally sort of tend to die younger than the females. But that's the females living until they're 35 years old means that they have quite a long reproductive age, okay, sort of and could produce anything up to sort of 20 to 30 pups throughout their lifetime, if they were to get to 35 years old. When it comes to what they feed on, well, they are opportunistic. Essentially, sort of, they will catch whatever is easiest and most prolific at any time. They have no real preferences, or at least it doesn't. There doesn't appear to be any. We've collected scats. We've been doing that this year, and from the scats we can collect the the remains of the fish that the seals have eaten, in particular the ear bones of the fish, and we can use those to identify the fish that they've eaten and also identify the size of the fish that they've eaten. And essentially whatever's out there in the North Sea or around the coast is what they eat. So quite often cod, sand eels, pollock, haddock, flounder, you name it, sort of they've usually sort of eaten it. A lot of squid turns up in their diet, so we get the squid beaks turning up in their scats. So yeah, sort of whatever's around and whatever they can easily catch. So they're opportunistic, whatever's around. They are sit and wait predators. There's been some work sort of done which has looked at their heart rates, and when hunting, their heart rates can go down to well, sort of almost 1 or 2 beats a minute only, and that's thought to be so that they are quiet and won't be heard by the fish, and essentially they'll sit and wait for the fish to go past and then catch them. When it comes to their general ecology, one of the things that they do regularly, and this helps us when it comes to deciding how many seals there are, is that they haul themselves out onto the rocks between tides. Some will do so right at the start, as soon as the tide starts to lower, and they'll come out of the water and sit on a rock. And then the tide will drop, and they may be 2 to 3 meters above the sea level sort of by the time it gets to low water. But they do that seemingly sort of between the tides. We don't really know what they're doing it for. Just resting, but they can rest in the water as well. It's not this digestion. We don't know exactly how frequently they do it, but we think that they spend about 1/3 of their time out of the water, the rest of the time in the water and foraging. So that's a daily behavior that they undertake. And then sort of they come ashore as well, sort of in the autumn, at least in the UK, they come ashore in the autumn, where the females then give birth to their pups, and they do so at traditional sites, although those sites are actually expanding around the UK coast. When it comes to the actual numbers of seals, there's about 40% of the entire world's population is to be found in the UK. And of that, about 80% of the seals are in Scotland, and about 20% sort of down the coast of the of the northeast and eastern coast of the UK. So that's sort of the general sort of biology. Oh, in spring, they also come on land as well, sort of because they have a molt, and essentially they molt the whole of their skin. It sort of it comes off, and they have their underlying coat there for the next year. When it comes to conservation, as I said, sort of the population of grey seals in the UK, mainly sort of found in Scotland, but a large proportion in England as well. And it's about 148,000 individuals. And the population does seem to be expanding. So they're certainly sort of least concern in terms of their numbers. And in fact, sort of the grey seals are one of the very first animals ever to be protected by modern legislation through the Grey Seals Protection Act that was enacted in 1914. Probably the first animal to be protected by modern legislation. And then sort of it was further sort of conserved through the Conservation of Seals Act in 1970, and now is covered by things like the Wildlife Act. In the past, grey seals have been culled. There is a long-running dispute between the seals and the fishermen in that sort of seals may take their catch, may be competitors, or they may damage their fishing gear, both through them, the seals trying to catch or to take the fish from the nets, or getting entangled in the nets and breaking them that way. And culls have taken place. The last took place in Scotland, but they have been culled off the Farne Islands in the 70s as well. Okay, so that's sort of the general sort of biology and conservation status of the grey seals. So we'll concentrate sort of on the breeding biology and breeding period, sort of because that has is relevant for the rest of the talk, really. And when it comes to breeding biology, we can find out sort of when the seals are pupping across the whole of the UK. We can monitor sort of when the pups are born, and it looks like there's a clockwise timing. So they start early in on the west coast, so September in West Wales, October in Western Scotland, and then you come over the top and down the east coast, and it's November / December in the Farne Islands, Isle of May, Norfolk colonies. So there's a slight difference. It's very much different if you go to Canada, because the grey seals are also to be found in Canada and in the Baltic. But the grey seals in Canada breed and give birth in the winter, which is very different from the seals in the UK. And it is thought that the two populations have been separated by about 1 million years. In terms of their evolutionary history, and possibly sort of they are separate species, or at least subspecies, because certainly their breeding biology is very different. The females come ashore and they give birth to their pups, and the grey and the male seals will also come ashore, mainly to mate with those females. Interestingly, sort of they will mate on the islands, but the fertilized egg in the female won't develop straight away. It will go into a suspended animation state called diapause, where it sort of waits for about 2 or 3 months before it starts developing. That means that sort of whilst the pregnancy itself sort of only lasts about 8 months or so, it does mean that the pups will be born the following year, 12 months later, at the right time for them to be ashore during the late autumn. Okay. The male grey seals come ashore. The bigger the better. If you're big, you will dominate, hence the sexual dimorphism. The bigger you are, the more likely you are to mate and the more likely your genes are to survive. But male seals also protect areas in the water as well. They're unusual when it in that sense, so they can hold territories on land and in the water. But they protect those, and essentially they're waiting for the females to pup, and then once they've pupped, they will then come into estrus, and that's the point at which the males can mate with them. And that mating tends to take place a bit later on in the breeding season. Anyway, the females come ashore and they give birth to the pups, and they weigh about 14 kilos sort of when they're born, and they are covered in a soft white fur that's called lanugo. And that is one of the properties of why the animals were exploited, in that the pups were killed for this soft white fur. The pups themselves remain on land the whole time and suckle from their mother for about 3 weeks. Now, in some islands across the UK, the mother stays with the pup the whole time. She doesn't move. She just stays with the pup the whole time. On the Farnes and in sort of some of the more southerly areas on the west coast as well, it doesn't look as though that they do. That the females are will move away from the pup and possibly go into the sea as well. Now we don't know if they go foraging or not. But yes, that's something that we need to investigate. Grey seal milk is incredibly rich, a lot of fat, and because of that, the pups gain a lot of weight quickly, about 2 kilos per day. And eventually, sort of the female will, regardless of what, whether or not she comes, stays with the pup or goes backwards and forwards, she will eventually abandon the pup and leave it on the island while she goes off and forages. And will never interact with that pup again. So we got these abandoned pups on the island. They're now very fat because they've built up a lot of fat sort of from the milk, and they will gradually sort of use that fat to develop their body tissues, as well as sort of laying down a fat layer to help them insulate when they eventually sort of go to sea. And that is probably the most dangerous time for them. That's when they need to learn how to forage. No one's taught them. They need to avoid the males because the males will kill them. Male grey seals have been implicated in a lot of sort of pup deaths, and possibly sort of even sort of cannibalism. Okay. What I'm going to show you here is what a colony looks like. So this is the day in the life of a colony. This was taken on Brownsman Island and is a time lapse of a day. I won't show the whole day. I'll just show a bit of it so you can see sort of what it's like. This also took place early on in the season. Okay, sort of and so you can see sort of how that it's not very dense at the moment at this time. So what you can see is there is it's dawn, and you can see lots of females and lots of pups, and every so often the female will come up this slope and go past. And you can see sort of females lying around, pups lying around, and occasionally sort of they'll be suckling. At other times, what you see is these movements of the females away from their pups. For example, this one is moving around quite a lot. So you can see sort of this is what it looks like sort of during the breeding season. I'll leave it there. So, but that sort of takes that time lapse is for the whole day. So, if we go on to that sort of, how many seals are there? Difficult to count. Perhaps sort of less difficult if you're there on the island, but still, it's not easy. When we talk about sort of where the seals are. And these are the areas that we need to actually sort of do the counting of. As I said, sort of most of the seals are to be found in Scotland. I said about 80%, and then we have another 20% sort of in this sort of east coast of England, including sort of Isle of May and stuff like that. And there are a few small colonies sort of off the coast of Wales and the southwest coast of England, but they're very small and largely insignificant when it comes to the overall grey seal population in the UK. Okay. But there are problems when it comes to counting grey seals. I showed you sort of early on sort of the picture of the taken from a boat of seals coming out onto the sandbanks of Holy Island. They're often in places that are difficult to access, that are difficult to count. Remember, sort of, they spend about 2/3 of their time foraging at sea. So at any particular time, any seal that is found on land, there may be another 2 animals sort of that are at sea. So counting seals is incredibly difficult. The other thing as well is that the seal that we count sort of on the Farne Islands could be the same seal that is counted in Scotland, or in this case, these are some satellite tracked seals in a study that was instigated by Bernie McConnell, who's done some really, really nice work on seals on the farms, but he unfortunately died this year. But you can see sort of these are all seals that were tagged on Farne Islands, and these are their movement patterns. You've got some that went down to Don and Nook, and then others that went up to Scotland, and we have this one that went all the way over into the North Atlantic. So we've got huge movements of animals. So an animal that we count sort of here, if we then do another count sort of, and it's not on exactly the same day, it could be the same animal that we count there. So there are problems when it comes to counting seals. So how do you do it? Well, sort of the Sea Mammal Research Unit, based up in St Andrews, has been commissioned by the UK government to actually undertake surveys of the seals, and they do it sort of using a fixed wing aircraft. So they go over the different areas and count the numbers of pups that are born. And this is the Sea Mammal Research Unit sort of flying in their plane over the Farne Islands. This is Inner Farnes here, and they have a camera that is specially sort of adapted for aerial taking aerial images, and it's got high resolution. They've also got sort of a thermal camera in there as well. They can fly for several hours, and they do so at about 300 meters, and they fly over all the areas that are known to have seals. There's a problem though, because the Sea Mammal Research Unit, sort of using these fixed wing aircraft, they can't do it regularly. In this image here, we've got sort of 5 flights, but more often it'll be maybe 3 or even less than that sort of flights. And depending on the timing of those, what we have here, sort of these lines are theoretical sort of pups. So the white bit is when they're with their mother, and the black bit is essentially sort of the bit when they're with their mother. So they're on the islands here sort of for about 2 to 3 weeks, well, sort of up to there, and then sort of some indeterminate length of time, because it depends on the individual seal, that it will be sitting on the island. So it all depends on when your flight goes over as to when you're counting those seals. If the females are pupping at different times, then your sort of seal that you count sort of in October, in an October flight, may well be the same seal that you count sort of in November. It may now have molted, or it may still be white, or it may be a completely different animal. So there are difficulties when it comes to counting when you do so infrequently. And this is sort of some of the ways that they get around sort of this difference, that they take into account sort of the numbers of pups, number of white coats, number of molted pups, and do some mathematical modeling in order to sort of get some idea of the numbers of pups, because it is the numbers of pups that gives you an indication of the population size. Okay, so it's important when it comes to those models to identify the different stages, because that leads into your population models. And here we have sort of some images of the pups. These first three are what are known as white coats, right? Sort of they've still got that lanugo, that white coat. You know, so this is a sort of newborn pup, all the way up to one that may be 10 days old and is looking a bit like a fat boar. Then we have what are called sort of molting stages, and they go for anything sort of from just some small patches appearing, all the way up to one sort of where there's a little bit of lanugo left on the animal. That's up to about 20 days. Actually, earlier I said that sort of the females stay with the pup until they're about 3 weeks old, and this is at the stage at which the sort of female tends to leave the animal, leave the pups, and the pups sort of sit around, sort of essentially sort of turning that sort of fat that they've stored into body tissue before they then go off. Now, when it comes to those population models, you have to be able to identify the white coat stage, the molting stage, and the molted stage. Okay, sort of, and what you can see is obviously sort of there's very little difference between some of these stages, you know, sort of whether this one could be called a white coat or a molting stage, then, you know, there's a very fine line, and you have to have very, very clear images in order to be able to make that discrimination. And what we have with the Sea Mammal Research Unit is that they're flying at 300 meters with a camera that's taking photographs, and you can see differences, but there's, you know, sort of, it's not ideal. Okay, so how do we do it on the farms? Well, traditionally, seal counts are undertaken by the rangers, and they do so every day. Oh, sorry, every 4 days. They will go out and they will count every single pup that has been born. All new pups will be sprayed with a dye, usually something like a sheep dip type dye, not sheep dip, but a sheep dye, or sort of a variety of different sort of dyes have been used, but they're sort of biodegradable type things. And they spray each new pup, and they spray it a different color every 4 days. So after you've got about sort of 4 or 5 colors, you know that sort of one that you sprayed green when it was new, you can count that seal for until it molts the green off. And by having different colors, you can follow the development of the pups as well. But not only do they sort of spray all the new pups and count them, but they also count all the dead pups, and they spray the head as well, so that they don't double count them. And then all those are counted, and as well as the colour is recorded as well. Notice how different this is from the Sea Mammal Research Unit. The Sea Mammal Research Unit sort of undertake maybe 3-4 surveys. Rangers are doing the counts every 4 days, or as near as they can, sort of logistically, throughout the breeding season, right? So starting off in October, all the way up until December, going out as every 4 days and counting the animals. So all that population modelling that we had earlier for the Sea Mammal Research Unit is really sort of unnecessary, because when it comes to the ranger seal counts, they account in the absolute numbers of pups born every single day. So that's easy then, isn't it? Well, this is groundsman again. This is a short little video, and it just shows what it's like. This still isn't quite sort of peak season. It becomes a lot denser than this, and this is just showing you sort of what it looks like. Now, what you have to think about is, imagine now that you are a ranger. If you're a ranger, you've seen this seal at the back there. Oh, that's a new one. I need to spray it. Well, if you try walking through here to get to there, this seal here, and this seal here, and this seal here, and this one here, and the mother, and probably these ones over here, will not take too kindly to it. And they are, we've seen, so they weigh about 150 kilos. They're big animals. They have big teeth. They carry a lot of bacteria that you really don't want to get sort of into a bite wound. So you really do not want to be bitten by a seal. Traditionally, sort of in the past, sort of sealers, you know, the ones who went out to actually sort of kill the seals and get this, if they got bitten, they would get a thing called seal finger. Essentially, sort of where the finger would just almost explode, in the size would increase hugely, and lots of problems associated with it. Okay, so the rangers have to sort of try and negotiate their way through, and they do this by trying to distract seals and letting sort of one of the rangers sort of go through, trying to avoid the bites of the females around, or trying to get in from a different direction, and it is all very difficult, and it is all very stressful. It's stressful for the seals. It's stressful for the rangers, but we get some really nice data. We get sort of all those, you know, brand new seals, seal pups. We get the absolute numbers, but it is very disruptive. But we get these sorts of data. This is for Brownsman in 2019, and these are the counts that were made on individual days. And what you can see is that peak pupping took place probably about sort of 2 weeks into November, and you can see sort of that it then sort of tails off, but carries on until late December. And you can see sort of that we've got the cumulative pup counts here. And we can do that for every single island and work out sort of the overall population. So that's great. You know, that is almost the gold standard, you know, because that is what you're trying to get, is the absolute number of pups born, because pups translates into females, reproductively active females, and from that we can estimate populations as well. Pupping provides us with an indicator of whether or not a colony is doing well, if it's increasing its pupping, if the pups are coming surviving well, then we know that the females are doing well and things like that. So it's a great way of actually sort of doing it. But as I said, it is fraught. So is there an alternative? Well, we've seen the fixed wing aircraft that goes all the way over the UK coast searching for seals. But there is a closer, an alternative that is closer to home, that is perhaps sort of more linked to particular islands and stuff, and that is to use drones, or was it sort of unoccupied aerial vehicles. This is one of the drones that was used this year. It is a DJI Matrix RTK. Brilliant sort of bit of kit. This is Richie Southerton from TerraDrone, who was employed to actually sort of use the drone. It's a big drone. And it's able to carry a really sort of good camera. Well, it can take an ordinary camera sort of with a sensor that's about the same as that of the Sea Mammal Research Unit, but it flies at a lower altitude, so it gets better, higher resolution. It can also carry a thermal camera as well. And we look at that in a bit, because this year was the first time that we started using a thermal camera. This big thing can fly for about an hour, flies at about 100 to 140 meters. The seals do not respond at all to the presence of the drone. We have looked at sort of the behavioral reaction of the seals, and it is nil. The most they react to is the drone operator standing to the side. That gets more of a reaction than the drone taking off. This is the drone itself. This is a drone above the seals, and I think that I've got. Here we go. This is the drone. This is on Brownsman, and so there's. Okay, sorry, sort of these are meant to be some videos taken showing you sort of what they look like. I'll see if I can go in to, here you go. Right, so we just did. So this is one of the, sorry. So what you can see here is the drone sort of flying over. This is not the height at which it undertakes most of its flying. This is it coming down to land after it has been used. And again, sort of this is just showing it sort of hovering above. When it is actually surveying, you cannot see. Oh, you can barely see the drone itself. Okay. So that's what we've been using. And what do they produce? Well, this is one of the WAMSs on the outer group. And what you can see is an image that has been stitched together of lots and lots of individual images. And it means that we can look quite in some detail at an image, and we can count the seal. So we've got a seal pup here, seal pup here, seal pup here, and a female over here, and we can count the numbers on the island. It means that the rangers don't actually have to go in amongst the seals. The seals are, as I said, sort of do not respond to the drone at all, and simply sort of carry on doing what they're doing. And a survey may take sort of 10-15 minutes to do the whole of an island like the WAMS is. We can get down to, and we can also sort of decide sort of what sort of pup it is, if it's a white coat or if it's molting. Right. What I need you to do now, though, is just this illustrates one of the problems, really, is that whilst it was nice and easy on a substrate like grass to identify the seals, on some surfaces like this rocky area, it is very much more difficult to actually find and count the seals. So where are they? Well, if you look closely, you can see that there are 3 females up here. Here's one, here's another, here's another. But you can also see that they are extremely similar to their rock coloration. There's a few more up here and a couple more down here. There's a pup here, there's one in the water there. So you can see sort of, you know, that whilst it is easy to see them on some surfaces, on others it's much more difficult. Now you can do it, you can count them, but it is not easy. And that is why we started to trial using a thermal camera. What you can see here are images of the same area, one using what's called an RGB, which simply means the normal photograph of inner farms. And here we have the same from the thermal camera. And I've overlaid these two on top of each other because these arrows are going to identify sort of some of the problems that we've seen. So here we've got sort of some marks on the image. Now, is that a seal or is it not? Very difficult to decide. But when we look at the thermal image, no, definitely two seals there. So what the thermal image can do is to give us a much better indication of whether or not it is a seal. And then sort of what I pointed over here sort of was, well, a slight problem with the thermal image in that sort of it doesn't look like there's a seal there. But when we look at the thermal image, there is a ghost of a seal here. And that's probably because this female had been lying down there, possibly suckling the pup, and had rolled over, leaving a warmed area on the ground. So, yeah, so one type on its own is possibly sort of not sufficient. We need to have them both. I also want to highlight sort of these two down here, because we certainly sort of may have picked up that pup, but we certainly didn't pick up that there was another pup hiding under the boat. But it comes up fairly clearly on the thermal image. Again, sort of this just shows sort of this is on Brownsman. This is sort of one of the areas that they really love sort of pupping on in. Again, I've overlaid them. And what you can see here sort of is another benefit of the thermal image is that we've obviously got sort of pups here. We've got a pup here and a pup here. But when you look at the thermal image, there's no thermal image there. And that's because these are dead pups. They're not alive, they're not producing heat, whereas this up here, which we could have thought is simply part of the rock, is actually very clearly a live pup. So one of the benefits of using the thermal camera as opposed to simply sort of the aerial image from the drone is that we can identify whether or not the pup is alive or dead. And that is important when it comes to estimating the numbers of seal pups being produced and their mortality. So going back sort of is really important that we're able to identify the pup stages. It looks like we can do so using the drones. And because we can do these drones much more frequently than the aerial surveys, we don't necessarily have to take into account sort of some of the factors that came into play with the Sea Mammal Research Unit type estimates. But there are pros and cons. We've got range accounts, we've got UAV visual, UAV thermal, fixed wing, and accuracy of pup counts, where the rangers are probably sort of really good, but they're all really good. And in fact, sort of when it comes to sort of the drones and the aerial imagery, probably better than the range accounts, because Often there'll be pups that are hidden from view, even by rangers sort of moving around the island. They'll be hidden behind rocks within crevices, and it's amazing how quickly they can actually disappear. Accurate pup counts when the numbers of pups are dense is low when it comes to the rangers, and that's because of the difficulties of getting to the pups when they're dense, because it's simply not safe to do so in some circumstances. But it doesn't matter for the drones whether or not that's true. But of course, the brilliant sort of part of the ranger counts is you get these cumulative counts that tell you about the mortality of the animals, you know, sort of, and how many are born and how many have died. And that's important when it comes to sort of overall models. Survey times, well, it takes a long time to do the ranger counts. They have to go in amongst all the animals, trying to find sort of a new pup, trying to work out a strategy for actually spraying that pup and taking it and things like that. But they can do so, but it takes a long time. As I said, sort of the visual drone can be done really quickly. 15-20 minutes to do the whole of Brownsman Island, which would take several hours for the rangers. Thermal camera has to be flown lower, and therefore it takes a lot longer to do the surveys, but it's still probably still quicker than the rangers. Fixed wing, thump. Same as the visual ones. Cost-wise, well, sort of you have to pay the rangers, you have to pay the drone operators, you have to pay for the cameras and the equipment, sort of, and you have to pay for a fixed-wing aircraft, which costs a lot of money. So doing it for just the Farne Islands is probably not viable, but it is if you're using a drone. But there's another part to it, and that is how long does it take to actually process the images. For the rangers, after they've finished, they've done it, they've got the counts. For all the other techniques, they have to be processed. Someone has to go through and count the numbers of individuals. Okay, sort of, so it can take a long time to do so. Now, there are new techniques coming out, sort of machine learning, artificial intelligence type approaches to actually automate that. But it's still in its infancy, but I'm sure sort of in the future processing time will come right down. And is it important? Well, yes, because things are changing. Things are changing out there, sort of, and we only will get this from actually doing the counts. These are data from the Farne Islands. These are all the different islands on which the pups are born. And what you can see is that just 20 years ago, almost all the seal pups that were born on the Farnes were born on these two islands, the blue ones, the North and South Wamses. Almost no other pups born anywhere else. Come to sort of 10 years later, and so there's a bit of confusion there with the numbers, but about 10 years later, we've started to record when the different surveys were undertaken. But what you can see is that sort of 20 years ago, a few pups were starting to be born on the Staple and Brownsman Islands. And now, since these are data for 2019, the vast majority of pups born on the Farne Islands are born on two islands where 20 years ago they weren't even to be found. And similarly, over the last sort of 6-7 years, the numbers of pups that have been born on the inner group of islands has increased. 10 years ago, there were none, or the odd one or two would turn up there, but it would be an odd occurrence. Nowadays, Wide Opens Island has probably more pups born on it than are born on the Wamses. Okay, so what we've seen here is a real movement of of animals from one set of islands, the Wamses, over to another set of islands in the outer group, but also an expansion of the seals into the inner group islands as well. And these sorts of things are being seen across the whole of the UK, and seal numbers are increasing. So in 2019, it was around about 2,800 pups were born on the Farne Islands, and it's likely that this year, 2020, we didn't get a proper count. 2021, i.e. this year, or this last season, it is probably going to be higher. That all sort of tells us about sort of the seals and the population and their conservation status, and things that we perhaps need to look out for. If it had been going the other way, we might need to do something in terms of their conservation. The fact that they're going this way may mean that we have to think about compensation for fishermen if the seal population is increasing. You know, sort of it feeds into a lot of different management choices once we know the numbers of seals. Interestingly, sort of what we can see here is the date when the pups are born is gradually getting later, or the average date. Now, this is kind of a false change, because all it really is doing is encompassing some of these new islands and the times at which they're born, because the newer the island, the later the pups were born. The older the island use, the sooner the pups are born. Okay, but it's important for us to know sort of how many seals are there. Finally, sort of just want to sort of leave with a bit of Storm Arwen, because after it had come through, obviously sort of there was the impact it had sort of in the terrestrial environment, but reports started coming out of some really serious impacts of Storm Arwen on seals and seal populations, and particularly sort of St. Abbs. St. Abbs, Storm Arwen had a huge impact. They estimate about 800 pups were killed. That's probably about a third to a half of the pups that were there at the time. Okay, so that's a huge impact. When we look at the Farne Islands data, and we haven't analysed it all yet, I have to stress, you know, sort of, but we have looked at some of the islands, and we've not found any difference. In fact, sort of the numbers after Storm Arwen have gone up, in line with the sort of essentially the females giving birth to more pups, and so the numbers have gone up. So on inner farms, for example, they went up from about 90 to about 110, and we had counts sort of just before Storm Arwen and a couple of days after Storm Arwen. So did it decimate the seals? Well, it all depends on where they were, and it's probably related to the topography. At St. Abbs, the seals give birth on beaches that are backed by very high cliffs, whereas the farms are quite low-lying, and the seals and the seal pups, as you will have seen sort of from the time-lapse video, they move around a lot. And they can move from those exposed areas as the surf was being sort of pushed over the top of the beaches, etc. They could move up. St. Abbs, they had a cliff wall behind them, and they had no escape, and that's probably the reason behind such large mortality at St. Abbs. It'll be interesting to see sort of whether or not there's been an overall impact of Storm Arwen, but for the farms, probably not. Okay, and so thanks for listening. If you've got any questions, then please get in touch. The seals are still being born out on the Farne Islands now. If anyone is interested in going out to see them, I think you've probably missed the boat sort of for this year, but go out with the tourist boats. They go around the islands during the pupping time, and you do get to see these very photogenic sort of animals. These lovely guys. Okay, if you have any questions, please get in touch.